Well, I was outside today and I was just sitting taking in the sunshine. It was 57 degrees outside, which is really nice right now. It's in, March. But a fighter plane flew over. And I'm used to hearing fighter planes fly over. When I was in my youth, I lived on a farm and I walked through the beans, and it was not uncommon to see the F-4 fighter jets dogfight over our fields. And it didn't matter what field we were in. We had fields that were many miles apart. You get to see them dogfight. That was during the Vietnam War. So I got to thinking about it, and it's kind of interesting. You really don't know who you know until you find out who they are. And the reason I'm saying this is because I had an aunt that worked at Jet Propulsion Laboratories in Pasadena, California. And she worked in the wind tunnel where they tested jets or different devices for their resistance to high speeds. And I didn't find out until well after the first space shuttle launch that she was actually working there when they were testing the first space shuttle. No big deal. Unless you're into rocket science. I also had the privilege of knowing her husband, my uncle, who worked in a little machine shop in the Los Angeles area. Don't know exactly where it was. Doesn't matter. But anyway, he went into the office one day and there was a government man in there. And he was saying his goodbyes to everybody because he got his draft papers. This was during World War II. And he told the government man he really appreciated, working for him. He didn't know what he was making for the government man other than there would be a screw here or a part there. Didn't know what it was for. So anyway, the government man said, "Where are you going?" And he said, "I got my draft papers. I got to report for the draft." And the government man said, "Don't leave yet." And he went into an office and came back later and said, "You're going to receive a certified letter in the mail telling you to stay where you're at. You're going to receive a telegram telling you to stay where you're at. And you're going to receive a phone call telling you to stay where you're at." And my uncle just kind of said, "Okay, whatever." Next day, went back to work, just like he was supposed to. The government man showed up eventually, and when he did, my uncle went in and said, "I don't know what you did," but he said, "I really appreciate you getting me out of that war." And the government man took him inside in a private little office, and he said, "This is classified information. You're not allowed to tell this to anyone, or you will disappear permanently." And he said, "You've been making parts for the Manhattan Project." My uncle was one of the quietest, most reserved men you'd ever want to know. He had no idea what he was doing other than working in a machine shop. So here's a kicker. A good friend of mine, and he was in my accountability group, was telling me about his dad. His dad was an engineer. He actually worked for the company that make all the Ferris wheels, Eli Bridge Company, or Big Eli as it's called now. They make the Scrambler, but there's Ferris wheels all over the world, and they've made most of them. But anyway, his dad was in the service, and he wanted to do an overseas tour. And every time he'd go in to be tested, they told him his eyesight wasn't good enough. And so he got a phone call from a friend of his in the service. He said, "Bill, how would you like to go do an overseas tour?" Bill said, "I'd love to do an overseas tour, but I can't." The guy said, "Why not?" He said, "My eyes aren't good enough." And the guy said, "Well, hold on a minute. I got a gentleman here who wants to talk to you." So he put this other guy on the phone. He was a general. And the general said, "Bill, how would you like to do an overseas tour?" He said, "I can't do an overseas tour." He said, "I've been tested. My eyesight's not good enough." And the general said, "Bill, guess what? You just passed your eye test." Bill was elated, but he didn't understand why. What turned out that Bill was the only person in the service that knew how to adjust the Bombay doors on the Enola Gay so that she could drop her cargo, close those Bombay doors, and get the hell out of there before everything blew up. Bill was another very quiet, mild-mannered, easy-going gentleman. You'd have never known. So it just goes to show, doesn't know who you know. Doesn't matter who you know. You won't find out until it's too late. And that goes back to an old saying I heard a guy say one time. A guy asked him to get him a job at the grocery store. And he said, "You got to get the job yourself." He said, "Well, you know people." The guy looked at him and said, "Doesn't matter who you know. It matters who knows you and how well they know you." Have a great one. Thank God for our fighter pilots that are flying overhead.